guys, this is Grant. I just hooked up my Keystep to my Volca Modular, and it was a little bit harder than I thought. And as I was trying to set it up, I do what I usually do when I can't figure something out right away. I look on YouTube and see if anyone else has done it. At that time, there were no other videos about how to hook a Keystep up to a Volca Modular, so I'll show you what I did. Quick disclaimer, I am not an expert on control voltage at all. This is the first time I've used CV to do anything. So I'll show you what I did, but if you're watching this and partway through you say, hey Grant, there's a better way to do this, just leave a note in the comments, let me know what that way is, and help a newbie out. So what I'm going to go over is I'll start with the cable that I bought so that you know what that exact cable is. I see that question all the time. I'll show you the patch that I used on the Volca Modular, which I think is the simplest patch you can possibly use to hook this up. I'll show you the settings I used in the MIDI control center, and I'll show you the tuning that I did on the Volca Modular. So that's 4 steps. I wasn't really counting. I think that's 4. So to start off, we will unhook everything and just start from scratch. So here's our Volca Modular with no CV plugged in, with no cables plugged in. This is just the default routing and then whatever I've got the knobs set to right now. So you can use the little touch screen, play yourself a scale. Yep, it works. So our goal today is I want to map this Keystep so that the C on the ribbon here corresponds to the C on the Keystep here. So the first thing we're going to do is plug the CV from the Arturia Keystep into the Volca Modular. The types of cables you need for this are a little different than your normal patch cables. The CV input on the Volca Modular is you just have one port for both gate and pitch. What you need to do is get a cable that looks like this on the end that goes into the Volca Modular and looks like this on the end that comes out of the Keystep. So what you can see is we've got the left and the right mono patch cables. They're the length of a normal patch cable. So this is not your typical like an RCA style jack. This is just a mono patch cable, and then you need to combine them into one. Let's take a look at the manual so we can see how those are actually mapped before we do anything else. So if we pull up our handy manual, one thing you will notice is that it says you can hook up a mono jack if you want. Connecting a mono patch cable to this jack will result in the same signal being applied to the CV and the pitch offset inputs. So if you only want pitch or you only want gate, you can do that with just a regular patch cable. What I want to do is control pitch and gate, so we're going to use this stereo cable. The thing to remember when hooking CV up to the Volca Modular is that the left tip of the input, so that's going to be our white cable here, is the gate, and the right is expecting the pitch. And that's that 1 volt per octave signal. Again, I'm just reading this right out of the manual. So if we look at the back of our Keystep, flip this up here. So on the back of the Keystep, we've got mod, gate, and pitch. So according to our manual, we want to use the left side, or the tip of the input, to our gate, and we want to use the right side to our pitch. If you wanted to hook up the mod to the Volca Modular, you could do that on the Keystep, but since we only have 2 inputs, today I'd like to use those inputs for gate and pitch, so we'll only be using these 2. So now we take the other end of this cable and we run it into the CV in jack right here. And you'll notice if I press the keys right now, it does nothing. There is no default routing for the CV input. It's still routing the ribbon input to that source, so we're going to need to manually patch it. So next to the CV input on the face of the Volca Modular, we've got our two little ports right there. We've got the top one and the bottom one. One controls gate, one controls pitch, and fortunately we've got this handy little symbol next to it that helps us tell which is which. It's that note with the little line through it that denotes pitch. So let's just match up this little note with a line through its symbol. Take that output from the pitch here. And then we're going to match it to that same symbol on the input of the source module. So if we did that right, we should now be controlling the pitch of the Volca Modular with our Keystep. Let's just test that out. So the gate is controlled by this, but you'll notice as I move my finger on the controller, it's not changing the pitch anymore. That's because the pitch is now controlled by this. Okay, good. We know that the pitch is being controlled by the Keystep now, so now we want the gate. So if you remember how your default routing works, the gate is controlled by the envelope function here, feeding into the first LPG here. So what I want to do is take the gate output of our CV, and I want to run that into the gate input of that first function. So let's test that out. All right, so now we have both the gate and the pitch of the Keystep being used to control the Volca Modular, and the ribbon now does nothing. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. You can't use these two at once. Everything about the default routing on the Volca Modular gets overridden once you plug any cable into the inputs, and that includes the keyboard controller. It's now being overridden in that default routing. So I said earlier my goal is I wanted to make that C on the ribbon match up to the C on the Keystep, but this is a lot higher. Let's just compare them really quick. So here's the C on the Keystep. And here's the C on the ribbon controller. So clearly it's in a different octave, and it sounds a little bit out of tune too. Fortunately, we can control that on the Keystep software. So this is the part where I got kind of stumped, where I was working on this myself. I did some reading, and I didn't know this because I'd never used control voltage, but I guess it's a pretty common situation to have a mismatch between octaves when you're connecting a pitch control to a device or an oscillator that's receiving pitch voltage. In this case, we have a few different ways to deal with it. We could simply change the octave of the Keystep, and that'll work. In this case, I don't want to do that because I've already got sequences stored on here, and I don't want those to default playing back at a different octave. We could also, well, I don't know, if we change the octave control here, let's find out right now if that does anything. So no. The octave up-down that you see on the front of the Volca Modular, that only applies to the ribbon controller apparently. So if you do that, it will have no effect on the CVN. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the MIDI control center of the Keystep. So I've got the MIDI control center pulled up, and what I've done here before I started this video, I set everything back to its default settings. So you should get a control center that looks like this if you're using it for the first time. So we've got the Keystep plugged in, we've got the latest firmware, and we've got the, I guess the newest version that I know of the control center. Let's scroll down and see what kind of controls we get over pitch CV. So this section is your CV and gate output settings. We've got settings for pitch, mod, and gate. We're happy with how the gate works, and we're not using the mod. So let's look at what options we have on pitch. Volts per octave is what the Volca Modular uses, so we're good to go here. And this is the parameter we want to mess with. So 0 volt MIDI note. I'm interpreting this to mean when the Keystep is sending a pitch of 0 volts, what note does that correspond to in MIDI? By default, it's all the way down here at C-2, and I want to change it by about 2 octaves. So let's bring it up to C0. And let's see what that sounds like. Okay, good. We're at least in the right octave now, so that helped. Let's go back to the ribbon keyboard to compare the pitch now between the two. So here's the Keystep pitch. There's the ribbon controller pitch. To my ear, it sounds off by about a full step. So what we can do here, we have a few options for tuning. I'm going to go into the MIDI control center and I'm going to change my 0 volt MIDI note by 1/2 step. See how close that gets us. That's C on the ribbon controller. That's pretty close. It still sounds a little out of tune, so we're going to use a tuner, but I at least know that we're starting from the right 0 volt MIDI note to make this as close as possible. So now we're going to do some fine tuning. This is the last step. One function I did not know about until I started looking into this a little bit more is you do have a fine control over the tuning of the Volca Modular source oscillator. You just hold down the function key and then you turn this knob, that's the farthest knob to the left, on your source module. So I'll repeat what we're doing here. We're changing the tuning of the module so that it matches up with the offset on the keystep. A little disclaimer here, this means that we're taking the pitch you get from the ribbon controller and we're taking it out of tune a little bit on purpose so that we can get the keystep to be in tune. And that means just whenever you're done using the keystep, don't forget you're going to have to retune this if you want to go back to using the ribbon controller. So let's get our tuner. I've already got hooked up here. I've already got it turned on. And let's see what note we're getting when we press C. We're almost getting C. We're getting a little bit of a low pitch here. Okay, so that stayed almost exactly at a C. I'll bring up one thing I've kind of noticed here is that the pitch doesn't seem to be as steady when you're using the keystep input as it does when you're just holding down a key on the ribbon controller. I have no clue why that is. I have a feeling it doesn't have anything to do with the stability of the pitch voltage coming out of the keystep. I think that's fine. Something's going on with the modular. And I might be able to control it or I might not. I'm not sure. Somebody more knowledgeable, please chime in the comments. But we're able to get a pretty consistency. You can hear that wobbling, and then you can also see it wobbling on the controller. It's like a vibrato, but instead of sounding nice, it sounds bad. If we try and do a scale here, if you watch the tuner as you play that, you'll notice it seems like it's getting a little bit more sharp the farther we get up the scale. And if we go down, it gets more flat the farther we go down the scale. So it's not totally tracking note for note. This is close enough for me. It pretty much works within 1 octave, or at least within a fifth. That sounds like a fifth to me. Unfortunately, if you go all the way up an octave, that doesn't sound like an octave. At least not to my ears. It's not quite right. But I think this is close enough to be able to use the keystep to control the source on the Volca Modular. So this is the exact method that I used to hook up the keystep to the Volca Modular. If there's a better way to do it, please let me know. But if you've got these two pieces of hardware, even if you don't have a tuner, you'll notice we got really close without the tuner. So you just get this cheap little cable. Link in the description to the exact cable. The reason I chose this one is because it does have the white and red leads on the end, and that makes it easier to make sure that you've got the right ends hooked up over here. But this will at least get you started.